And let me share screen here. All right. Cool. So you can probably all see the chat tonight. That's great. So who all made it last week for my review of MVC? Oh, I did one last week. If you weren't here, I guess let me know if you were not here last week for that review. Yeah, if you want to check out, definitely check out the video from last week as well. You know, we can go over tonight some more, but make sure you check out the video from last week as well, because it definitely will give you, where can I move you to? Little video guy. Hide video panel. Optimize for full screen. Video clip. I guess we'll just put it down there. That should work. All right, so we all know the basic setup of an app, okay? And let me know if you can't see if it's hard to see my writing here. Can everybody see my screen pretty well? Let me create a file and see if everybody can view the text okay. So if I'm on a different monitor tonight. Okay. Yeah, if it's hard to see, let me know and I can increase the size. I'm on my laptop tonight, so we're gonna make it happen. All right, so who is all, give me a show of chat messages, I guess, instead of hands, but who's struggling with Sequelize and getting everything working with that this week? So quite a few people are struggling with Sequelize. Okay. So let me walk you through a little bit of Sequelize with an application tonight. So MVC is just a design, as we went over last week. It's just a design pattern of code. So it's not like required to make your apps MVC compliant or whatever, but it is a way that we code with groups, teams, especially with teams, to make sure we have a consistent design or coding structure, like folder structure and file structure across the board for teams to work with. And so they can jump into your project and be able to figure out really quick what's going on. That's the whole idea behind MVC. Okay, so that's why we do it. But it's definitely not required. But I would encourage you to try to start building in this pattern your applications and stuff, and it'll help you to quickly build them in the future faster. But what I'm going to start with is just a simple server.js. And what are the packages I need? If I'm going to use Express, for instance, I'm going to install Express, but if I want to use Sequelize, what's the package I need to go along with Sequelize to get it up and running? If I want to use MySQL with Sequelize, what's that package? Sequelize, and with MySQL, we need what? MySQL 2? Right. Okay. So I'm going to install those packages. I guess I'll install Express handlebars along with this. And I should also init. All right, cool. So we have our package JSON, we have a server.js. Now, Sequelize is just a package, right? Basically a kind of a tool we use to make our lives easier when integrating with MySQL. When integrating with multiple databases, it works with a whole bunch, but MySQL is the one we're using for the camp. And it's a very common database that's used across the world, okay? So, but I know Sequelize at first because we tend to like get in this mindset where it's just another thing to add to our plate. We get in this mindset where we think it's making my life more difficult, right? And I know a lot of you are probably in that mindset right now, but I want to open your eyes to the power of Sequelize tonight and why we use it, because it's such a great tool that does make our coding and our application development easier. One of the things that goes along with Sequelize that I use every time is the CLI. So the CLI is the command line interface. It's just a way of doing some things from the terminal with Sequelize to save you some time and having to do it manually. So for instance, we all know that Sequelize has a config or a way to connect to your database, right? So if I go over here, oh, I've been watching disc golf, so don't watch that. Don't mind that. I'm gonna go over here, and I have fire ants crawling over me. It's the awesome campsite session tonight. I'm gonna go to the Sequelize docs, okay? And we're gonna go here, and we're just gonna look at the Getting Started tab of Sequelize. Okay. Now, one thing you're going to notice is it doesn't say anything about the CLI. And why is that? Well, the CLI is like something that another team, another developer built, right? And so it doesn't coincide with their documentation, but it makes your life easier when it comes to like setting up Sequelize and stuff like that. So right here, you'll see that it has the connection instance right here. So if I go back over here to our server file, and let's see, and I say, let's see, const Sequelize equals new I guess require Sequelize. Okay. Yeah. All right. So we'll require it up here like this. Sequelize. And then I'll just say down here, a new Sequelize. So if I say new Sequelize, what does that make the Sequelize package? What is it out of the box? If I were to ask you, yeah, it's a constructor, right? So it's a way of making an object. So you use Sequelize, the constructor, to make a new object. And what do we use objects for? Well, there's two major things that we use objects for. And you don't need to make it any more than this. And that is just, we use it for methods, to call methods, and we use it to reference properties, right? So we have properties on our objects. So if I were just to make a little dummy object down here, I could have like name is JD, right? And get name, which would just like maybe console log my name. which would be a method. So I could say get name, console log, period, there we go. Console log this dot name or something, okay? Let me make sure my period here is working. There we go. Okay, so this is what we use objects for. It's a way of organizing data. So giving data specific references like name. So we can assign those references a value. And it's also ways of creating just specific functions really that relate to our object, okay? So we could call this person or something, right? And that would be very, very indicative of what's going on with this object. And that's exactly what Sequelize, the team behind Sequelize, made. They made a constructor so we can easily use the Sequelize tool to call methods, right? And reference properties when we need to, okay? So what does it require? So if you look over here, if we're gonna do a basic connection with Sequelize, it requires a few things. So in order to connect to our specific database we've made, we put in the database name, username, and password, okay? So I'm gonna copy this stuff here and just paste it in. Like this. Huh, that is weird. Oh, dialect. Let's do MySQL, like so. All right, so it requires these things to connect. So if I have a database that I want to connect to, what's the first thing I need to do here with Sequelize? Currently, I do not have a database, so logically, I would do what first? Make the database, right? So I know we've done many different ways. I've shown you different ways of connecting and creating databases. One of those would be in Workbench, where you could connect to Workbench and then create a database. Here I'm in SQL Pro, which is equivalent to Workbench. But if you have the MySQL CLI installed, so if you type in your terminal something like MySQL -v or MySQL -- version, there we go, and you see either access denied or you see it tell you the version number, then that means that you have the CLI installed in your terminal. And what's really cool about this? Well, I don't use it for much, but I use it for one major thing, and that is to quickly create a database for myself. So let me show you how that works. So I'm going to type in MySQL -u, which stands for the username. So I'm going to type in my username, which is root, and then -p, which represents telling it I'm going to put a password in. So then I'm going to hit enter, okay? At this point, it's going to ask me for the password for my SQL server, my SQL server. I don't have a password, so I'm just going to hit enter. And now I'm logged in. So imagine that this right here, where I'm at in the terminal, is actually the same as a query box on your Workbench or SQL Pro, whatever tool you're using to connect to your server, okay? So I'm in a query box right now in my database server, okay? So I can do something like this, create database, and we'll call it review_12. I'm gonna hit semicolon, and then enter, and there we go. Now I have a database called review12. So if you wanted to do that in Workbench or SQL Pro, you would just simply do the same thing over here. Create database review_12, and then semicolon. Then you would just run those queries or hit the lightning bolt on Workbench, right? Okay, so, but I like to do it in the terminal because it, you know, I'm doing it very slow tonight, but you can imagine if you get this process down, it's a very quick thing. You don't have to open up your Workbench or anything and wait for it to load. You can just simply pop into your terminal and have yourself a database in a few seconds, okay? So now I'm just gonna type exit here in the terminal, and that's gonna get me back out of the MySQL server back into my terminal, okay? So over here, since I have a database at this point, we're going to plug that in, review 12, okay? And my username is root, and I do not have a password, so I'm going to just remove that. And now this is optional, okay? You don't actually have to plug in the host as localhost. If you're coding or using SQLize locally on your computer, you don't have to plug this in. This is actually there by default. So I should actually put default there. So I'm just going to leave that off, okay? Because it will actually connect to localhost by default. You don't actually have to include that property there. And then we have our dialect, which is our type of database we're going to be using. Because remember how, like I said, SQLize connects to multiple different dialects, okay? All right, so there's our connection, okay? And so if I come back over here, we can do a couple of things to test the connection. Here is one way to test it. So now I'm going to come down here. I'm going to say DB actually. So I'm going to change SQLize to DB like we did before with MySQL package. So I have a shorter name to access it. I'm going to paste this in. I'm going to change this to DB. So we're going to DB, we're going to call our new SQLize object, and we're going to authenticate, which means connect to the server. And once we're connected, then we're going to console log connection has been established, right? But if it has an error like trying to connect, then we should see that in our catch right here in the terminal, okay? So let's try this out. I'm going to run this file. And there we go. So you see that it did a test, which is just executing. Select 1 + 1 as result, right? So that's just a little test query there to the database. And we got the connection has been established, okay? All right, so that being said, what can we do with SQLize at this point? Well, you might have thought that there was this magical thing going on with the config folder and your config JSON file and all that stuff we did to like connect to SQLize. But really all that file is just a file that they reference right here when they connect to SQLize for you. So the CLI setup is just simply utilizing some files that it makes for you to make you not have to do this stuff. So creating the object yourself, putting the information in, it already has the properties set up for you. All you got to do is just plug those values in, okay? Next thing though is our connection here. So once we authenticate, once we connect, we can actually utilize SQLize to do whatever we want. So we can actually take this away because we don't actually need that test. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to use SQLize to create a model, okay? We've all dealt with models, right? So if I pop this in here, I'm going to create a variable called model here. And it's going to be equal to the SQLize constructor model property. So on the constructor, they have a property that's accessible to you called model. And this allows you to build a model for yourself, okay? Now, this is a different sort of way of doing this. Here, this is a class. Now, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to grab the old school way down here that we probably all are used to seeing and put that in here instead, because I'm noticing this is a little weird. Let me paste this in here. And I'm going to change this back to Sequelize here. There we go. Okay. So here we're doing the defining of a model. And this is the standard way, which is you create a variable for yourself or a constant, whatever you want to do. And then you define a new model. So what is a model? Well, it just represents, think of it like representing an item in your database. So how do I want to describe an item that's going to be stored in my database table? So we're going to make a table, right? But we don't want to describe what that an item might look like when it gets added to that table. So here I'm going to describe it. Let's call it, I don't know, somebody give me an idea. I want this to be catchy tonight. So give me an idea of a table we want to create. Somebody give me a cool little simple idea. User login password. Okay, we could do that. All right, so we'll create a user then. And I'm going to leave it as lowercase user. And I'm going to have a email and password. Just to keep it simple tonight, we'll have an email and password. And then what's this down here? So after our first object that we put in here with our values, our fields we're describing, we have this empty object. And this is just options that we can utilize to do different things, like setting up associations and things like that. It also allows us to use hooks. So what is a hook? A hook is just simply a way of doing something at a specific time in the process of creating this table. So when Sequelize creates this user table, we can actually call certain hooks down here in the options to happen before the table's created, after the table's created, before a save. So before a new item is added to the table, we can call hooks. And so all these different times in the process of creation, deletion, whatever, we have the ability to call these methods that will run at those specific times. Now, I'm not going to do that in this case. I'm just going to leave our object empty. So that just tells Sequelize no options needed for this model or this table, okay? So here we go. So I'm going to define the user model like so. And if we come back over to the docs, down here we have this sync method. Who all remembers the sync method? What does sync do? And why is sync so awesome? So if I call sync here on our model, what is sync going to do? Well, let's actually view our database right now, currently, what it looks like, okay? So I'm gonna go back over here. I'm gonna go to review. Let me refresh my databases. Refresh databases, and then I'm gonna go to review 12, which is our database we made tonight, okay? And currently there's nothing in our database. All right, so we have no tables or anything in there. And if I take this sync away and just run this file right now without sync being applied, let's see, we made the model we defined a user model. So this is in essence telling SQLize how we're going to telling it how to create the table for us, okay? But if I come back and refresh, we see that it didn't do anything at all, okay? So how do we get SQLize to work for us? Now I could go in here and I could use, you know, review 12 and then create a table myself, okay? But that is old school. What I'm talking about tonight is using a tool that does all this for us, okay? So SQLize, what it's gonna do is, if we call sync, it's going to read our model and how we defined our fields, and it's going to create a table for us based on the fields that we described, okay? So let's try this. I'm gonna save this and run it again. You can see in the terminal, it actually tells you what it's doing. So right here, it is creating a table, if it doesn't exist, called users, right? And it's creating a bunch of fields for us. All right, so let's check that out. I'm gonna come back over and refresh. And now we have a users table. And if I look at the structure of that users table, we have an ID, an email and password, and 2 more fields that I didn't even specify. So look at this. I didn't specify an ID field here. I didn't specify created at or updated at. But SQLize went ahead and created those fields for me. Why is that? Well, those are just common fields, common columns that you use in any table, okay? Across the board. This is just, it's been this way for many, many years, back to the 70s, okay? So this allows us to identify a specific item in our database, right? And also tell when that item was made and know any time that it's updated, okay? So SQLize handles that for us, right? So sync is super powerful. It creates the tables for you, and it also adds some columns, some fields for you automatically that you don't have to manually put in there, okay? So after sync, what can we do? Well, once a database is synced, okay, we can then use our database table to create new items, right? So right now we don't have any items in there, but how do we actually create an item? So I'm gonna go inside of sync here in the then method, and I'm going to say user.create, and I'm going to pass in 2 properties, which I specified up here. So the 2 properties that I need to fill out, I'm going to pass them in. So let me just do jd@test.com. And my password is going to be an amazing pass, okay? So I'm gonna say create that. And then we're gonna have our new user that I just made. And I'm gonna console log the new user to the terminal. All right, so let me go back over here, run this. So we're gonna sync, console.log. And let's run this again. There we go. So we synced the database. And notice, in our terminal, when it did this command, it said this right here, create table if it doesn't exist, right? So what does that mean to us? Well, it means like if we already have the table created in our database, then don't override it. Don't destroy it. Leave it there. Leave it as is. And what's important about that? So we have to realize that when we're creating applications, sometimes we need to update how our database looks. So let's imagine if at this point, I want to go back in and I don't want to have just email and password. but I want to have maybe a username as well, okay? So if I come down here and I add username, and this is going to be a type of string, okay? And now down here, let's make Bob, okay, at test.com, and try to make him in the database as well. So now I'm gonna run this again, okay? And you're gonna notice something though. No errors were fired, but if I come back over and I refresh, you're gonna see that in the database, I have JD twice, but let's not worry about that. But you see that I have Bob in there as well. So what's going on here? If I actually come back down here and let me delete Bob, and I'm gonna remake Bob, okay? But this time I'm going to specify a username as well. So I'm gonna say username JD, okay? And I'm going to try to create Bob again, or username is Bob. That would be more representative of who this is. So if I do this again, let's notice what happens here. Okay, in the terminal now we're getting an error and it says unknown column username. So what's happening? Well, when Sequelize is syncing, right, when it's trying to create the table, if it doesn't exist, we're hitting a first error there. The table already exists, okay? So because of that, it's not going to try to recreate the table, and it's not going to try to update any fields. It's just going to try to utilize the table that's already made in there in the database. The problem is on this table, we have only set up these two fields, right? Email and password. And I did not set up the username field originally, okay? So what do we do in that case? Well, we can use Sequelize sync to update our table for us. How do we do that? Well, if we come back over to the sync method here, instead of just leaving it empty without passing anything into it, I'm going to pass in an object. And I'm going to say force property and then true. Okay, so if I put force true in there and run this again, you see we didn't get any errors at all. And if I come back over and refresh, we now have Bob, and he has his username in there, along with his email and password. Okay, so what happened? Well, sync force true will delete your table, completely destroy it, and then remake it, okay? Yeah, it's gonna drop. It's not gonna drop your database, it's gonna drop the table though. So we can actually look at what it did right here. So right here in the output in the terminal, it told us what it did. So it drops the table, if it exists, users, and then it creates it for us, okay, from scratch. So because of that, it will actually remake our database, our table for us, and add any fields that we have added or any changes we've made to our fields up here in our model. It'll take care of that for us. And that's, you know, really the super power amazing thing about sync, okay? Now, one thing to note, you notice that our table here is called users. We went over this last week, but Sequelize has a algorithm. So remember how I told you algorithms are just a way of a solution to a logical programming problem? So if we have a programming problem, like how do I take a name like this that the person has passed in? So I'm passing in user here, but how does Sequelize behind the scenes take that name and turn it into the plural form of that name? Well, they have an algorithm, a solution to that problem in their code. So they have coded out behind the scenes to turn any name that you put in into a pluralized name for you. And that's how we got the table called users. So it took this name and it just pluralized it for me, okay? Also note that you might use a capital letter. So what's going to happen in that case? So if I rerun this, it's going to recreate the database or the table for us once again. Because remember, sync force true is deleting the database and then remaking it. So if I refresh our table, our database, now we see that users is capitalized, okay? So just be aware that if you prefer or you are required to use a lowercase table name, then putting the model name in as capitalized here is going to create a table that is also going to be capitalized. Now, you can pass in options to change the table name yourself manually here. I'm not going to do that, but I just wanted you to be aware of how it names your tables when you use Sequelize, okay? All right, I'm going to stop there because I've been talking for the past 20 minutes, and I'm going to ask you, anybody have any questions or want me to go over anything more related to this basic Sequelize stuff? Any questions so far? So far, so good? Force true? Okay. So let's just do the opposite of force true. Let's do force false. So what is force false going to do? Okay, so let's run it again. And if we look at the output up here, the output for force false is just to create a table if it doesn't exist. So that's the opposite. It basically is not going to delete your table. It's going to just use the current table if it's there already, okay? So what happened is it didn't destroy our table and remake it with any fields that we might have added or removed or whatever. So let's go back in and let's remove the username now, okay? So I'm gonna take the username away. So now we only have an email and password, and I'm gonna run this again. Okay, and I tried to add a username to Bob, but what happened? I don't want a username to be added to my table, but if I come back and refresh, we see that I still have the ability to put in a username. That field is still there in my table, even though I don't want it there, okay? That's because force false is going to not delete the table and update it, remove fields or add fields. It's going to leave and use the existing table if it's already there, okay? Here's the deal to remember, that force false is default. So if you don't put anything into sync, it's going to force false by default, okay? But if you want force to work, then you have to put the property in there, force true. Yeah, and then once you put true, now this is not the default, right? This is going to actually do the deal where it removes the table, recreates it with all your new fields or any fields you removed, whatever. And so if we come back and refresh at this point, we can see that now Bob is there and that username field has been removed, okay? So it remade the table for us and updated it with our new fields, okay? Well, yeah, if you have 200 rows that you're adding during testing, that's one thing. Now, there's also called migrations where you can update specific things in your table, like adding a column, removing a column, something like that. But they're a little more tricky to work with. What I would do is work on your table, get your table to where you want it to be, and then start using it for testing rows. So adding rows at that point. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not easy to make test data that we can use. So here's the deal. Let me show you something. I'm going to go to my terminal, and I'm going to install a package called Faker. Okay. And I'm going to make sure it's saved as a development package. So what is Faker? So if I bring Faker in up here, we use Faker to just fake a bunch of data. So when we need to just create a whole bunch of fake dummy data for ourselves that we don't want to manually create, Faker is a great tool to do that. So down here, I'm going to call user bulk create, and I'm going to pass in an array, okay? I'm going to create that array here. So I'm going to say, let me see, let data equals an empty array, okay? And so I'm going to run a loop. So who has used a while loop before? Anybody used a while loop before? So they're very, very similar to a for loop. They will run until a condition is met, okay? But it's a little, the syntax is a little simpler than a for loop, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called count and set that equal to 100, okay? And then down here, I'm going to pass in count and then minus minus into my condition. So here is the condition. You pass it into the parentheses, but you can also affect that conditional variable. So here is the variable. So we could say, you know, if count equals to 0, then stop. And down here inside our for loop, I could say count minus minus, you know, something like that. But what I'm actually going to do is do that all in one up here in our condition. So I'm going to say just count minus minus. And so when the condition hits 0, when it's false, because 0 is a faulty value. So when our while loop hits 0, it will actually stop the while loop, okay? So down here, I'm going to say data.push, okay? And for every time this while loop runs 100 times, I'm going to push an object into our data array up here. So let's go ahead and create an email. So if I come back over here to Google, let's go over to npm faker.js, okay? That's the package I'm using. Here it is, the docs for it. So it gives you all of these methods you can call to create dummy data. And it gives you a whole slew of different types of data you can create for yourself. So let's see. Image, internet, email. So I want to create an email. So I'm going to say email equals faker.internet.email. And you call it as a method like this, okay? So this is going to generate a random email for me, okay? And then I'm going to do password, and I'm going to say faker, and let's come back over here and see is password on here? Yeah, internet, and then password as well. So I'm just going to copy this, paste this in, and we're going to do password like this. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to create 100 objects, each generating, or each being generated by Faker with a fake internet email and then a fake password, and it's going to put all 100 objects into our data array here. So now, right below, I'm going to say bulk create, and I'm going to pass in that data array to our user model, bulk create, okay? So let's see what happens. I'm gonna save this, come back over, and let's run No, this is all going to happen immediately. Okay, so this is a synchronous actual thing right here. This is not asynchronous. So Faker is synchronous. It doesn't actually have to wait or anything to create information. It's actually immediate. So this will all be done before this even runs down here. Okay. Does the declaration happen before? Yeah, so it's going to check the condition first. This actually is checked first. So this will actually decrement the first time before this runs the first time. Then it'll come back up here, decrement it again, then run this. So the condition runs before the stuff inside of your loop every single time, okay? But we're doing the condition and the decrementation or decrementing every time right here in our condition. So that's just a shorthand way of doing that. All right, so here I'm gonna run this. Let's see what happens. And I think I console logged that whole thing, which wasn't really great, but that's cool. So let me come back over here and I'm going to refresh. And now check this out, everybody. So we now have 100 users, right? With their generated passwords. Now I could like create a generic password for every one of these users, like password, for instance. And that way it would make it better for us. So let's come back over and let's just run this again. And in that instance right there, you all saw how fast it was for me to make a change to my setup here and insert those 100 values once again, okay? Now if I refresh, now everybody has a specific email or a random email generated just for them, but they also all have the same password, which is just password, okay? So that's how easy it is to generate data for yourself, fake data, and make changes to your database as well. So that being said, let's go up here and let's create a new field called username. And this is going to be a string. Okay, and down here, let's just add that to our objects that are being pushed into our database each time. So I'm going to say username. Let's come back over here to Faker, and right here there is a username as well. So like I told you, Faker is really great, and it has pretty much a value for anything you can think of. So I'm going to say username, call that, pass that in. And since we're using force true, it's going to remove the table, right? And it's going to recreate the table for us with our new field username. Okay, so I'm going to save that, come back over here to the terminal, and let's rerun it. All right, come back over to our table and refresh. And there we go. We now have usernames generated as well as emails for every single one of these users that we just made. And you see, that's how quick it is. That's 100 people we made in a split second. Okay, so this is a very good way of testing your database, adding some data to it really quick without having to manually do it. Faker.js is the way to go for that, okay? Any questions about Faker or the process so far? Now remove Faker and keep force true. Yeah, if you don't push the data and you use force true, it's going to remove that table and all your data will be gone, right? Yeah, because force true will delete every single thing from your table. It removes the table in its entirety. You manually created data. Yeah, I used to do the same thing. That's why, you know, the more you learn, the more you know, the easier it is to develop, right? We don't all do this stuff or know this stuff because we magically are just amazing developers, you know. We have to get there. We have to build our knowledge. So with knowledge comes power, right? They say that funny or that common slogan, right, from Spider-Man, but it's really true. With knowledge, comes the power to make more bigger things and make your lives easier when you're developing, right? So how do you insert insert new row? Okay. So if you wanted to add just one row to your current table without destroying it, is that what you're saying? Abhi, was that your question? How to insert one row without destroying it? Okay, so here, I'm gonna say force false, okay? I'm not gonna change how many I push, but let's just go back and look. So right now we have 1 through 100, right? Okay, and the first one is America Morar, okay, 35. So let's just remember that name. I'm gonna come back over here. I changed it to force false. So now I'm saying sequelize, don't erase our table, okay? Just do whatever you're gonna do to our existing table that we already made. So at this point, if I come to the terminal and let's run this again, what's gonna happen? If we come back and refresh, notice that America Morar is still there, but if I scroll down, we now have 100 more users that have been added to our table, okay? So at this point, we didn't delete the table and refresh it with new data, we just added to it. So that's the power of force true and force false. At any point, you can just turn it off and on, okay? Just simply by changing this property value right here to either delete the whole thing or just keep data you already have there. So it's really easy to just go back and forth. Does that make sense? How you can do that? All right, awesome. Okay, so moving on. So sequelize is really easy to use, as we saw, but we taught you the sequelize CLI for a reason, okay? So I'm going to take all of this away. And we're gonna put it all down here out of our view so we can't see it. And then over here, I'm going to run a command in the terminal. So we all installed sequelize CLI, something like sequelize -CLI-G, right? And that will install it globally to your computer. So then you can use it in the terminal in any package or any folder you're in, right? So I can call sequelize now. I'm just gonna run it without typing in any command. And that will just give me the list of commands that I can use. So here we see all the commands I can use, right? The one I want to do though is called init right here. So how do we do that? Well, we just simply type in sequelize init. Okay, I'm going to hit enter. And as long as you have the sequelize package installed in your node modules, which we do, right? Because right here we installed it earlier, you won't get any errors. So if you're getting an error when you try to do this, it's probably because you did not install sequelize yet in your folder. Okay. All right. So now we see that init did a couple of things here. So in our actual project folder, we now have the config folder and the config JSON, right? We have migrations folder, which we're not really going to use, but we're going to need it there. We have models folder in that index.js file that we all have gotten used to. Really, most of us probably don't understand it, but we know it's there, right? That's probably where a lot of you are, right, with this file right here. I'll go through it a little bit again and tell you what it's about. And then we have seeders as well. If we have time, we may go through seeding, which is what we did a minute ago. So seeding is just adding dummy data to your database to use for testing. So I showed you just a second ago using Faker.js how you can seed your database, okay? But we can actually use Sequelize CLI to run seeders for us that we set up in this folder. And like I said, if we have time, we'll go through that, but it's not really a super important thing. But here we go. So let's get into the index.js file here inside of models. So what does this file do? If you do not know at all what this file does, give me a correct in the chat. If you have been struggling with what this file actually does, say correct, JD, in the chat. I want to see how many people. And it's okay if you don't know, because the majority of everyone doesn't know at first, okay? All right, so I'm going to hide my terminal here, and let's walk through this file. So we see a couple of things that we're familiar with here right off the bat. So we see FS. We all know what FS is. It's just the file system package, right? So it's a way of like maybe getting the information from a file in our structure here. So I can look at this config JSON file and see what information it has in that file by using FS, right? To read that file, get the information from it, and then we can use that information in this file, correct? Everybody understands how FS is used, right? So that's what they're using it here for. It's nothing more than that. So they're using FS to read some files. Okay, we're using path, once again, to get the correct path to a certain file in our structure here from the root of our system. So remember that a lot of times it's important that we get the full path to a file, okay? We're also using file or path to do this right here. So let me copy this, and let's come back over here to Google, and let me just paste this into Google. What does this do? All right, so let me see. That's not the one. Node path base name method. So extract the file name from a file path. All right, so let's see, let's run this example here. So if I run this, oh, okay, demo path.js. So look, base name. Oh, they're running the file here. So we run the file, and looking at our file name here, demo_path.js, the file name or the path.base name will just give you the file name of that path. So here's our whole path, but the file name is right here at the end, and that's what the base name does, okay? That's simply what it does. So here they're saying __ file name. So let's actually see what that does. So I guess the current file name, okay. So __ file name gives you the current file name. Very simply, they're getting the file name of the current file that we're in. And what is the current file that we're in right now? It is the index.js file, right? So they're using this right here, the constant they made here, to ignore the index.js file because they don't want to use or run the index.js file and read it down here where they're reading the files, okay? Simply because this is just the file that does all the work here, and we shouldn't be doing one thing. And I'm going to go through what that one thing is, okay? So down here, they are requiring the config JSON, remember that? And they're just basically getting the information from it, the connection information. Okay. And down here, you can see when they create a new SQLized object, as I did earlier, and they just pass that connection information into it. Correct, just like we did. So imagine that this is the database, the username, and the password. That's all they're doing here, but they're just getting that from the config JSON, okay? So that's why they do that. And then right here, you're seeing this constant called DB. And right here, it's just an empty object. But in the end, what the goal here, down here when they export that DB object, the goal here, or the goal, I guess I'll put it down here at the end. Goal is to get all the model files, objects, and add them to this object, okay? So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get all the model files that you have made inside of models here. Ignore the index.js file because it's just the setup file, right? But if you have any model files, it's going to get all the model objects from those files. It's going to grab them all and add those model objects to the DB object and then export it out of this file in the end, okay? So what does this allow us to do? Well, it allows us to share this one object that has all of the models attached to it, okay? And that's what the goal of this file simply is. It's just a way of getting all your models, putting them into one object for you, and then sharing it. So you can import this file anywhere in your project here and have access to all of your models in one go, okay? But currently, we don't have any models at all in our file structure here. So let's do that. So we could like manually create a user, JS like this, and set it all up ourselves. So let's come back over here to, I just want to show you. So let's come back over here to model usage, model definition. Let's scroll down and see if they have an example. They don't have an example, I don't think. Here we go, right here. So we're going to grab this one right here. Back over. Let's go into our user.js file we made here. And let's paste this in. So what's going on here? I am sharing, or I'm exporting a function, okay? And this function receives two things. It receives SQLize, and it receives the data types object, okay? One thing to note here is that this is doing it the class way. So let's do it the old school way. Let me come back up here to the top where we did it earlier. Actually, where was it at? Getting started. Right down here. So let me grab this instead. And I'm going to paste this. Okay. And let's change this to user. So here I'm creating a new model called user. Once again, we're defining our properties, and then I'm just returning that new user SQLize user model, right, from this function. So what's going to happen here? Well, SQLize, the CLI pattern is to read this file, which in turn is going to grab every other file you have in models. So it's going to look, it's going to read our user file here. It's going to call this function. Okay, this function, once called, is going to get past the SQLize object as well as data types. Okay, and what we're doing here is we're using that SQLize object to create a new model called user, and then we're setting up our fields. Now, the one difference here is that we don't have access to the SQLize constructor anymore, so I'm going to instead change this to data types. So they give us the constructor basically form, and they call it data types. So you could probably call this SQLize, you know, and it's about the same thing. But instead, we're going to call this data types, okay? So what happens in this case? So now if I save this, what did I do over here to make a change? Oh, yeah. Save this. Let's come back over to our server.js file. And I'm now going to say constant models, all of my models equals require models. Okay, so I'm importing the folder, the models folder, but this is not going to pull in the whole entire folder in Node.js. This is simply going to look for the a index file for you automatically. So when you try to import a folder, so if I said import Cedars, for example, okay, so Node.js is going to look inside Cedars and try to find a file called index.js, and it's going to run it. So let me just make this as an example, index.js, okay, and let's just say test inside of there, okay, and let's run this now in the terminal. I'm going to say node server.js, and we see test, right? Because when I required the Cedars folder, Node looked for a file called index.js, and if there was one there, it's going to run that file for you. And that's what it's doing when we require models. So it's looking for a file called index.js, and because there's one there, it's going to run the code in this file, which in turn, like I mentioned before, is going to export an object of all of your models that you have made. So how many have we made? Well, we have made exactly one here, okay? So we're gonna have our user model. It's going to be exporting the user model object inside of a parent object, okay? So how does that work? Well, come down here, and let's console models, okay? But we're gonna get an error here. So I'm gonna run this. And at this point, it says, what's our error? Shoo, a whole bunch of stuff. It didn't show us the error, which is weird. Typically it would. Okay, let's try models console log models dot SQLize. If that's there. Okay, so that's there. So on this models object, not only do you have the access to your models, you also have access to the SQLize package. How does that work? Well, you look right here on that empty object. Remember how it's empty at first? Here, right here, they are adding your models to it. And then down here, they are adding a new property called Sequelize, and they're setting that equal to the Sequelize package. Also, they're giving you the constructor as well if you want to use that. So we have access to the constructor and the Sequelize package down here on our DB object that we're pulling in right here. So because of that, I could do something like this. I could say models.sequelize.sync. So create all of my tables, then console log, it worked. Okay, let's run this again. So I'm going to run this, and now we should see an error. Yes, okay, so it worked. It tried to sync, but it ran into an error when we tried to sync. And that's simply because my config JSON is not set up correctly. I have the correct username here, and I have the correct password, which is nothing, but I do not have the correct database inputted here. So we're going to change this to review_12. Save that. And now when I rerun this file, there it is. So now we created the table, if it doesn't exist, called users. And I believe, going back to our database here, we're going to still see all of our data because we told it to not force true, right? So it didn't delete our data. Well, let's go ahead and pass in force true, save that, and rerun it. And if we refresh the table, now it's empty once again, and we have our new fields that we made. So going back to our user model, here is the basic example they gave us in the docs. I didn't change this, so let's change this to email and password. Okay. And rerun it. So now it should erase the table once again and change it to our new fields, which are email and password. All right, cool. So we synced, but how do I access the user model at this point? Well, it's very simple. On the models object right here that I imported, there is a property called user. Okay. So now I can use that property to create a new user. So let's do email at test.com and password. Somebody has a fire going, and the smoke is going right in my eyes right now, so that's awesome. Okay. Say user, and let's console log user. All right, save that and come back over. Run this. And now, if we look at our table, we should have a new user that's just been added. So that's how easy it makes it. The Sequelize CLI is not your enemy, okay? It's actually very useful. It does all the setup stuff for us. It does the connection to Sequelize, or it does the connection to your database through Sequelize for you. It also allows us to easily pull in all of our models and use them in any file we have in our file structure, okay? Well, let me show you another cool feature about Sequelize CLI. So here I created a model, okay? I just made that model. We saw that. And that's good and great. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete that. And you would think, well, JD, that's pretty dumb because now you have to recreate all that crap you just made, you know, but that's cool. Because I'm going to actually use the CLI to do that for me. Okay, so check this out. We're going to type in Sequelize again. We're going to hit enter, and I'm going to look at the commands that I have access to. So down here in the command list, we have model generate. So we can actually generate a model for us using the CLI. If you look though, right here, it says aliases. So another name for this command generate is create. So you can do model create instead, which is just shorter and makes more sense to me. So we're going to use that command. So I'm going to run sequelize model create, and it requires a couple of things. So if I just try to hit enter and run this, it's going to tell me some options that it requires. Okay, so let's see. Right down here, you see all these options don't say required, but these two right here, name and attributes, are required. Okay, so what are those two things? Well, it says this option defines the name of the model. Okay, and then this is the list of attributes. That's not really specific or descriptive enough. I don't really appreciate how they didn't describe what this should be, but what that is just the fields that you want to create. Okay, we're going to say sequelize model create -- name. Right after this, I'm going to type in the name of my model, which is going to be user. Okay, and then -- attributes for this, and we're going to put in the fields that I want to generate. So I want to have a email, and I want it to be a string, and I also want to have a password, and I want that to be a string. Okay, so now I'm going to hit enter, and let's see what happened. If I come back over here, you'll see that now I have a user model file. If I go into it, there it is. We already have our function that was created for us, and we have the user model created, defined through sequelize, and it's set up the two fields for us right out of the box. Now you'll see that in migrations, there is this new file that's been generated here. So this is mainly for sequelize CLI to keep track of what you have done. You don't actually have to worry about these files. Now you can use them to do different things, such as, like I mentioned earlier, manipulating or changing specific columns in a table. Instead of deleting the whole table, you can use migrations to make small changes, but it's not required to even mess with these migration files at all. So I won't even touch on it really tonight. But now, same thing goes. The CLI basically does a lot of work for you. Now you're going to also notice this thing right here, okay? This associate. So what is this associate thing? Anybody know what this is about? What this whole associate thing is all about? What is associate? Creates relational DB. Okay, table relationship. Yeah, so it's a way of creating a relationship. Yeah, like foreign keys or something. So let's do this. Let's go back over here. I'm going to create another model, and I'm going to call it, let's see, what could a user have? Maybe a group, okay? So we're going to have a user group, or a group that a user can join, something like that. So it's going to have a, simply just going to have a name, okay? I'm going to remove the password field. Let's make this. So now we have another model that I just made called group, right? And it has a name that we can add for the group, okay? But how do I associate this group with our users? Who can tell me a way to do that? How could I say a user can have many groups, and a group can maybe have many users? Think of it like that. Yeah, foreign key, we need a foreign key, but we want to use Sequelize to do all that stuff for us. A many to one, right? So a many to one, or many to one is one way to do it. But what I really want to do in this case is create a many to many. So because the user could have many groups, right? And let's do it this way. Let's make it easier. Let's make it where a group can have many users, but a user can only have one group. How about that? Okay. So one to many, I think, is what you were saying, Peggy. Let's try that out. So here in the user associate function, I'm going to do something. I'm going to say this or user, either one you want to write. You can just write user if you want, but I'm just going to write this, which basically just references this. Okay, so I'm saying user here dot belongs to is applicable to all entity relationships. I'm not sure. Right, yeah, all different types. Yeah, whatever relationship you want to create, you can create with methods in this function right here, which is really amazing. So if I want to create a one-to-many, I'm going to reference our user, and I'm going to call a method called belongs to. That is now, since we have created a Sequelize model here, that model object has a method called belongs to on it. And I'm going to pass in the model that this model user here belongs to. So meaning I want to create a relationship where the user is going to belong to one group. Okay. So all I need to do is pass in models. So we have access to all of our models right here, which is really awesome about this as well. It passes in all the models as an object right here into this function. And then I can reference our group model here and say, now this user is going to belong to a group, okay? Coming back over here to the groups, I can say group, or I can say this has many, because there's a method that's attached to this object called has many, and I'm just going to pass in models.user like this. And at this point, you would think that would be insane, JD, if that's all you have to do to set up a one-to-many relationship. But I'm telling you right now with Sequelize, that's as easy as it is. We have now at this point put in the code to set up a one-to-many relationship, and we are set to go and set to use it. So let's run our sync again. So I think I have it set to force true, so it should remake our table. Okay, all good. So now if I come back over here and refresh our database, we have groups and we have users. So notice at this point, we still have JD in there. I don't think I had force true, I guess, because JD's still in there. Let's refresh. Yeah. Notice that JD does not have a group ID. So there's this new field that has been added by Sequelize to our users table automatically. We didn't make this field group ID, but Sequelize actually made that for us. And what is that? And what is this ID for? Well, it's just simply a way for the table to reference what group this user belongs to. So over here, when we create a new group, it's going to have an ID, starting at 1 and then incrementing as you make more groups, right? But over here, when we make a new user, we have to know who that user belongs to. So we're going to put the ID of the group from this table. It's going to put it right here into this column for us. And that way, at any time, we can always reference who or what group this user belongs to. So how do we use this sort of relationship thing with Sequelize? How do we take advantage of Sequelize and the power of Sequelize to do something like this? Okay, so this is why it created it right here, because I created a user here. So let's do this. So I'm going to take this away for a second, and I'm going to say models, because now I have two models, right, attached to this object. So now I'm going to reference our group, and I'm going to create a group, okay? And that just requires a name. So let's give our group a name. What's one of your group names y'all have made up? And I'll put that here. Y'all have like names for your groups in class? I'm guessing maybe. Like team, let's go with Team Awesome. How about that? So we're gonna make Team Awesome. And here is the team object. So let me show you numbers. We are not, okay. Let me show you how easy it is. So if I have a group here created, I have a group that's been created. At this point, I can call that group object. And on that object, there is now a method called create user. Did I make this method? Is this just magical? Well, no. When you set up relationships with Sequelize, it actually creates these methods for you that are very useful. So on the team object, there is a method called create user now, because it references the name of our other model that's associated with the group. We called it user. So it creates the method based on that name of our model. So now over here, I can say email is jd.com and password is pass, okay? And we'll just say then, and we'll say user and console.log user.email, just so we know it happens, okay? So we'll save this and see what happens. If I'm correct, this should run. All right, no errors. So if I come back over and look at our database, what do we have? Well, let's check this out. So under our user table, we have a new user, JD, right? And you notice under group ID column, there is now this one, right? And this arrow, which indicates in our table that there is a relationship going on here. And if we go to groups, there is a Team Awesome group now with an ID of 1. How about that? So I made a group, and I also made a user on that group. It's pretty easy stuff, right? But how do we actually get access to users specific to a group? So let's do this. I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy this. And down here, let's do something again. Let's say models.group.find by PK, which is how you can find by an ID. I'm going to say 1. So get the group that has an ID of 1, okay? And then we're going to say group. Then in here, I'm going to say group.create user, and let's do Bob at this point, okay? So we're going to create Bob now and save him. Let's make sure we force false so we don't erase JD that's already in our database. And now I'm going to create Bob. So if I come back over and refresh, we only have one group still, right? Because I pulled that one group and then I made a new user for that group. So now notice that JD and Bob have group IDs of 1. So they both belong to the group with an ID of 1, okay? Well, how do we pull the group and also get all the users that are associated with that group? Because you'll notice if I do this, okay? Let's take this away inside of here. And let's just console log the group. I'm going to find that one group that we made, Team Awesome, and console log what information Sequelize gives us, okay? So right here, we see that it gives us the group object, and it gives us the ID and the name, okay? But if you notice, it doesn't give us anything about the users that are associated with this group, right? And this is going to be really vital when it comes down to your application. You're going to be like, how do I find out which users are on this group and use that to display something in my page or whatever, right? Well, Sequelize gives us a very easy way to do that. So here in the find by ID or PK, I'm going to pass in a second object here, or second value. That's going to be an object. And I'm going to say include the models dot, actually right here, let's just say models dot user and see if that works, okay? So this include property tells Sequelize when you find this guy, this group, I want you to also include the associated users with that group, okay? So let's see if this just works. If it does, I will love it. So right up here, okay, we have Team Awesome. And model options, is there a groups? Oh, users. So right down here at the bottom of our object, notice this. There is now a users property, and it is an array. And it looks like there's 2 objects in that array. So let's try that. Let's say group dot users and console log that and see what we got. Check this out, y'all. So we have my array of users, we have JD, and we also have Bob included in this users property that's now attached to our group object here. Is that awesome or what? I can't hear your voices right now, but I hope you're all going, oh my goodness, this is really cool. Sequelize is really nice. I wanted to kill Sequelize and all the team that made it previously, but now I'm thinking, this is actually really good. To get some of these commands. Okay, yeah. So let's go through it. So I wouldn't actually do. Let's try to find it in here. So associations here, and okay. All right. So notice here foreign keys. So when you create associations between your models, foreign key references with constraints will automatically be created. So you notice how it created the group ID for us automatically. So here we're saying init a new task model, init a new user model. And then down here we're saying user has many tasks and task has or belongs to a user. So that's the one-to-many, right? Same thing we just did. And that's going to generate a user ID property for us automatically, or user ID field on the table row or table itself. Okay, but associations, you can look down here. I think it tells you a little bit about associations. It says just adding here we go. So right down here, one-to-one. So if we use, if we have a player model and a team, oh, okay. So one-to-one. Yeah, so if a player can only have one team, then you could just use belongs to do that. But in our case, we have a group that can have many users, so we have to do the one-to-many. That's how that one would work. It also goes through has one, so has one, a project might have one user, so we can set that up here. I'm hoping with the run through I just did that this stuff will make more sense to you. You can also pass in options for yourself. So if you wanted, for instance, the foreign key to be called something else. So if we look at ours is called group ID here. That's the foreign key. We could actually change that and make it custom for ourselves. So if I come back over here to the, I think it's on the user here, our user. When I say belongs to, I could pass in this object and set the foreign key property to whatever I want to be. So I could say, instead of group, let's call it team. Let's just say something ridiculous like team specifier. Yeah, that way we know it worked, okay? So now I'm gonna run this. And the problem is I'm trying to rerun this and I haven't forced true. So we're gonna get an error, okay? Unknown column team specifier. So let's come back over to server.js and let's do force true. So we remove the data. Okay. Let's see. Cannot read property users of null. So that's because I'm trying to console log users right here. No big deal. And we run it, and there we go. So now if I come back over, our group ID is now called, oh, well, it actually made group ID and team specifier. Huh, that's weird. Groups, foreign key. So that's weird that it did that. I don't think. So is it supposed to be on the group instead? Let's try this. Let's run this again. Come back over, refresh. Well, that is weird that it keeps the group ID, but it also creates the one that you specified. So let's try this. Initiator, you can, in this example, has one, will add an attribute project ID. We'll gain a foreign key will be placed on the user step. You can also define the foreign key if you already have an existing database and want to work with it. Yeah. So that is weird, man. The way it gives us the group, the team specifier, but it also gives us the other foreign key that they generate for us. I think that's just a new thing, is it used to not do that. Let's see. Sequelize, generate our custom foreign key. Scroll down. So has many. Oh, so maybe you're supposed to do it on both? Okay. So let me copy this, come back over to user. And paste this in. Rerun it. And let's head back into our database. Aha, that's what it is. So if you want to change the foreign key and not have the default generated for you, then you have to put the foreign key property on both of your associated methods, like so. But you're seeing it's, you know, you're really not going to do much more than this, everybody. I mean, you can get into some pretty advanced associations, but for the most part, Sequelize is going to do a lot of that stuff for you. Using the power of Sequelize is a great way of avoiding having to do all that code and figuring it all out, right? But you can see it goes through many of the associations, all the associations you could do, the basic relationships that you can have in a relational database. It walks you through the basic setup for those. You do notice though that the new documentation uses classes now a lot, because classes are common in JavaScript these days. We can probably go through classes next week a little bit to maybe clear up some questions you might have about classes in JavaScript, but they're not too crazy. Let me stop there for right now and ask you if you have anybody have any other questions about the relationship thing. I know the documentation can be confusing, but if you go to the associations tab here and look at my video we made tonight, then you can probably figure out how to do the basic associations you need. Anybody have any questions? The mosquitoes are out. No questions? Really? Awesome. Gosh, okay. All right, so how do we use Sequelize? Wow, yeah. Comes with lots of trial and error, believe me. How do we use it to make a simple application? Well, we have Express handlebars installed. So let me go ahead and create a views folder. And in here, I'm going to create a folder called layouts because that's required as well, as we discussed last week. I'm not going to go through handlebars a lot tonight, but I'm going to use my layout file to create a basic markup here. And down here in the body, I'm going to output the body of any one of I'm going to output the HTML from any template that we call our render. So down here, I'm just going to have a template called handlebar or index.handlebars, okay? So here in this template, we're going to create a form. And this form is going to send a post request to let's say group /groups. And it's going to have one input. And this is going to have a name property or name attribute of name, because that's it. We're going to type the name of the group into this input. So I'm going to have a placeholder which says type the name of the group. Let's make it very specific. And up here, let's make sure we add method of post to our form as well. Okay, and then right below this form, let me copy this one actually. We're going to go have a users form. And this is going to be the email. Type the email. Type your email. Copy this. And this is going to be a type of password. And this is going to be password for the name attribute. And here we're going to say type your password. Okay. We also need a button for each one of these. So it'll submit. Submit. Okay. So we have two forms we're going to use. And then down below here, I'm going to have like an H1 that says groups. And right now, let's just get the forms working. So in our server.js file, I am going to do a couple of things. I'm not going to create a routes folder and separate routes tonight. I'm just going to really make it super simple. I'm going to create our app, our Express app. Okay. I'm going to say app.use, let's see, what's it called? Express dot URL encoded. And what is this? Require, create, comes, payloads. What is it called? So express URL encoded. What is that property? Let me search for it here. Encoded. Options, extended true. So we're going to pass in extended true. Just our basic setup here for Express. App.use express.json. So that way we can pass in, we can send information through a form and it'll come through on the body of the request. So request.body, right? Okay, and then I'm going to say app.get, actually app.post / groups. So we're going to, this is going to be our route that our form is going to submit to. So getting back to our, let me close this. Getting back to our form right here, this is going to submit a post request to /groups. So I'm setting up that route right here, /groups. Here we're going to have the request and response. And I'm going to get the data from request.body, right? And I'm going to say, let's see, models.group.create, and I'm going to pass in the data to that. Then I'm going to redirect, so res.redirect back to the root URL route, okay? So very simple. For right now, I'll leave it at this, and then we'll get to the user in a second. So I'm going to say app.get, and our root URL, when we load that, we're just going to res.render. Actually, let's do models.group.find all. Let's get all the groups. Okay, and then we're going to res.render our index template. So this index template here, and we're going to pass it some data. So I'm going to say group data is going to be our groups from our database. Okay. Okay, so how does this work? Let's save this. Let's come back down here. Let's take all this away because I don't want to run this code. Let's bring that down there. We're going to app.listen on 5,000, and we're going to console.log. Let's just say listening. Nothing crazy there. And let's run this, okay? Get out of here, mosquitoes. So it's listening. All right, let's go to localhost 5000. Come back over and let's see what error we got. No default engine. Oh, I didn't set up Express handlebars. So let's go to Express handlebars package here. And we're going to copy these 2 lines of code right here and paste them in right up here. That's fine. No biggie. Like so. I didn't pull it up here, did I? See how this works? How we debug our simple dumb errors that we make? THBS equals require express handlebars error. Now let's try this a 3rd time. See what we get. Listening. Okay, good. So now we can go back over, refresh, and there we go. We have our 2 forms and we have groups. Okay. So right now we currently, if we look at our tape, our database, we currently do not have any users or any groups. Okay. That's cool. I've already synced though, so I'm not going to do sync again because my table is already there. Just know if your table is already created, you don't have to sync every time. Sync is a way of creating the tables if it's not there and or deleting them over and over again if you want to do testing, okay? But since I know the table has been created, I'm not going to sync, but I am going to utilize our models here to make groups and users, okay? So down here, we're going to be passing in data to create a group, okay? And that's fine. So if I come back over to the form for a group, let's actually make this more specific. So right here inside of this, let's make an H4 that says group, create group. And then in here, let's have an H4 that says create user, because that will make this more visible. So here I'm going to type in a name of a group. So let's call it awesome. Let's call it Team Awesome. And let's submit this. And you notice how it submitted the data to the backend. And then my backend redirected me back to my home or root URL, which is localhost 5000, right? So we basically just saw the browser just kind of refresh, is what it looked like there, okay? When we come back, you're going to see in our table now that we have a group that's been created, okay? Because in our route here for the post on /groups, I created that group, and then I redirected back to the home page, okay? Now, notice that the home page, every time this route is fired, which is our localhost 5000, we find all the groups and we render the index template and we actually send that data to the template, okay? So because of that, I can actually go down here below our groups and I'm going to use an each loop in handlebars to loop through the group data. So remember that here I'm creating a property called group data, which is our groups, from our database here, but I'm creating that property here called group data and I'm sending that to the template. So now we have access to that property called group data. Now I can actually loop through and print out the information for the group, okay? So here I'm just gonna say, let's do like an H3 and say, name. So that property called name on our group, right? It's going to come from right here, the name field. I'm just outputting that field right here because we are inside of our group data array and we're inside the current object in that array right here. So in that object, there's a property called name. right? And I'm going to save this and come back and let's see what happens. So now we have Team Awesome showing up because that's our one group. But I want to do something else too. I want to be able to see the users that are associated with the group, okay? So let me do something. I'm going to come back over here to our routes and let's make a post route for /users, okay? But what I want to be specific to is actually to a group. So let's do this. Instead of having a user form up here, just a standard form, I'm gonna attach that form to each group instead. So let's take this and come down here. Let's have a form inside of the group, okay? Let's actually create a div. So these are all going to be separate, okay? And down here in our actions, so we're going to submit a post request to /users slash, and then we're going to say right here, ID. So I'm going to grab the ID from the group that I'm currently in the loop here, and I'm going to output that into the URL right here, okay? So email, password, and we should be good, okay? So I can use this now, come back over here to our route. So /users, but I need to change this a little bit. I need to add the group number or the group ID that I'm sending through. I'm going to use a parameter here on the URL. So a parameter is just a way of creating a variable for yourself on the URL so you can use it inside your callback here. So now I can say the group ID is the request.params.id, and that comes from this right here. This could be 1 or a 2, or it could be any number based on the ID of our group, right? We don't know what the number is going to be. That's why we use a parameter here. So now this will be that number. This could be a 1 or a 2 or whatever it may be coming through, right? So now on our models creation here, or our group creation here, let's change this. Let's say models.group.find by PK, which is find by ID. I'm going to pass in the group ID. So now I find that one group. So here it is. I have that group. Now let's say group.create user. Gosh, these mosquitoes, man. They are coming out of the woodwork like crazy. And we're going to pass in the data that I get from the form, okay? That form data is going to come from request.body, right? So I'm going to pass in the data for our user. And then I'm going to res.redirect once again back to the home page. So how is this going to work? Let's see what happens, okay? Let's come back over, let's refresh. We now see that we have Team Awesome, okay, and it has a create user form here. So I'm going to say JD at test and pass in my password. I'm not doing any validation checking here, so that would be something that you would probably want to make sure you have. Oh, cannot post to /users. Oh, I didn't refresh my server. Let me refresh the server. So now our new route is set up, so it should work at this point. So let's go back over here and do pass, submit. We were redirected back, so it looks like it worked. And if I come back over here, refresh our users table, we now see that we have with our wonky, foreign key. Let me go back to, let me change that actually. I'm not going to worry about the foreign key. We all know what that is, so no worries about that. So the one thing is, though, that right now we can't see the users when this page loads that are associated with this current group, right? So how do we do that? Well, coming back over here to our index, I'm going to also right here below our form, I'm going to loop through. So I'm going to create an each loop here. And I'm going to loop through a property inside of our current group data object. So you know right here inside of the group data array, we are in that, as we go through each object in the array, we are accessing that current object here. So because of that, I want to access the users property on that group object. Okay. So right here, I'm going to say, let's just say H4, and on that user's object, I'm going to print out the email of that user. How is this going to work, though, unless we include the associated users with the group? Okay, so right here, I'm going to find all, but I'm also going to include the models.user. Okay. Now let's save this and come back over and refresh. Oh, let's actually restart our server and refresh. And now check this out. So now we actually have the user being printed out as well with the group. So let's make a new group. So I'm going to make a new group called Team Red or something simple. Submit that. And now we have Team Red. So Bob decides to join Team Red. So when I submit that, now Bob is on Team Red, right? And so Sarah joins Team Red as well. So now you see that both the users for Team Red are showing up. If another person joins Team Awesome, and I submit, now we see that 2 users are now on Team Awesome. So see, these associations give us the ability to create this really cool, basically user design and experience for the application that we're making. And Sequelize makes it very easy to do these associations, along with something like handlebars here that I'm using to show the data, right? Because this is just simply a view engine, right? It's just a way of using HTML, but we can send data to the HTML. So handlebars is very powerful. We're going to be getting into React pretty soon, which is going to be what you're using for your views. But currently, if you're looking for a way to easily use your data along with your views, then handlebars is great for that, okay? But let me walk through that app real quick before we end it tonight. So here's our app. Our main root URL loads, okay? And when it loads, we find all the groups, okay? We also include any associated users with that group, okay? Then we load the index handlebars template, and we send all the groups to that template. Okay, at that point when it loads, right here, our index template is just simply showing a form to make a new group. But down here, we're looping through that group data that we just sent through. And for each one of those group objects, we are creating a div, displaying the name of the group, but also a form that allows us to create a new user associated with that specific group, okay? So how I'm doing that is I'm creating a post route on the form that submits to /users, /users, and then we add the group ID here, right? Okay. And then when submitted, it's going to go to this route, which is the users route right here, okay? And we get the the data from the form, right? The email and password, of course, but we also get the group ID, which I sent through. And I'm using this parameter here to grab that ID from the route URL. So whatever was sent through right here is going to be now on this ID property right here, or this ID parameter. So I grabbed that through request.params, and then the name of whatever I called it. So if I called this blah, for instance, like this would now be blah, okay? That's what that does for you. And then what I do is I find the group that I got by ID here. So I find it by that group ID, and then I create a new user on that group. So that way this new user is associated with that specific group. And we get our foreign key set up and all that good stuff, okay? Also very basic, you know, creation on the group. So that form that we have right here at the top will submit to this post route right here, which will create a new group, okay? And every one of these just simply redirects back to the root URL. So what does this mean right here when we say redirect? Well, you're basically just telling Express to redirect back to one of your other routes that you have set up. Now, if we didn't have a route set up here, then this would cause an error. It would cause a 404, okay? But since we have a route on the root URL, which is this route right here we set up, then this is what happens every time we redirect back to root. It calls this route, which in turn loads all of our models again and sends that data to our index template, right? Okay, let me stop there. Any questions about this process tonight and what we went through? Sequelize, I know I covered a lot of Sequelize, but I had many, many questions about Sequelize, and I know you all needed some help with that to clear up some things and make you understand that it's not your enemy, but it's actually a great tool that we can use to make really awesome applications and just make our lives easier when it comes to working with data in our databases. Any questions tonight? Anybody? All good? Oh my goodness, man. All right. Too busy being home. Yeah, definitely watch this again. I mean, I know I flew through the little application I made at the end there, but it's really a simple app. And if you go back and look at it, you'll be like, oh yeah, it's nothing much going on. Can we create a page with both HTML and handlebars combined? You can, but I would suggest just using handlebars because that's what it's for. It's to be able to utilize HTML. So just because I'm adding data to this view right here doesn't mean you can just have a simple contact page that doesn't have any data being shown, you know, right? So if I added a new template here called contact.handlebars, and this page just simply shows, you know, maybe H3JD, and right below that, maybe my email, okay? So over here, I could just simply create a route that when you visit /contact, then you would just res.redirect to or res.send or res.render, I'm sorry, render the contact template, okay? So notice I'm not sending any data to the contact template because I don't need any data to be sent here, okay? So I'm just using this template file as just a view and nothing more than that. So just HTML, really, okay? So over here on our main thing, we might have a link up here at the top. This is going to be really terrible, but contact and say contact page here. And then on our contact page, we might have a link at the top that redirects back to home, okay? So let's save this and come back over, refresh. Now if I want to go to contact page, I just hit that. Oh, I didn't restart my server. Awesome. Let's go back. Now when I hit contact page, we see the contact page, and when I come back to home, we see home, right? So contact is not using any data, it's just a view through HTML, okay? So nothing crazy there. All right, any other questions? We all good? I know, isn't it awesome? I've enjoyed it, so I hope everybody else has enjoyed it. You're very welcome. All right, everybody. Well, with that, I'm going to end it there, and you all have a great rest of your Sunday evening, and we'll see you next week, okay? You're welcome as always. Thank you. I will. About to go eat some grilled food and have a good time. See y'all later.